Hello, Jack. Nice
Hey.
to see you there. Really nice and impressive presentation. From your presentation, I got like a vision like the big guy love small cars. Is this only about the cars, or you love small things in general?
My house is this big back in there. Well, first of all, I like big cars too. Some of my favorite videos that I've done, we did a Kia EV9 recently. It's a huge thing. It's amazing. And it's a big car that is big on the inside, which is less annoying to me because it's actually using that space intelligently. But I think it comes from growing up in London. I'm obsessed with getting from A to B quickly and efficiently. So in my house, I have every mode of transport. I've got car, motorbike, bicycle, skateboard, feet. And I'll always choose the thing that I think is just going to give me the most relaxed journey. And I'm not going to suggest that if you buy a small car instead of a medium-sized car, you're going to be able to skip through gaps in traffic. But if we all started doing that, I think the effect would be profound.
Mm-hmm. How do you think it works only within the Europe or entire world? I mean, globally. For instance, imagine if you offer Renault 5, which is a lovely car, in somewhere in Los Angeles or other cities, and other people from different regions love to change their, I don't know, big trucks to small electric vehicles.
Yeah, I mean, this was very much focused on Europe, this presentation, but I think that America's obsession with big cars is going to be a massive problem when it comes to electrifying for all the reasons that we've just discussed. I've driven the Ford F-150 Lightning in the US, that's a small truck in America. And I got to a set of traffic lights and I saw there was something just over the end of the bonnet. I could see something. I looked over and I was like, oh, what's that? It was an Audi Q7. I was like, oh, okay. And, it's, again, what we just talked about. That car needs a huge battery. That battery costs a lot of money. It makes the car heavier. That affects the range. So I think the American obsession with big cars is, A, very difficult to pull them away from because it's so ingrained in the culture. And B, it's one of the reasons that they're going to find electrifying so difficult over there.
Okay, but in other regions like Asia, maybe South America or Africa, it should work as well, or just we have only one problem, which is United States in that case?
I don't think anyone's going to have a harder time than the US. I think that's probably I wouldn't necessarily speak on sort of Asian and African markets because it's not my area of expertise. But yeah, I think the US have got the biggest problem ahead.
All right. Okay, back to Europe. For instance, we have specific market like Germany, and in Germany it's very normal to, I don't know, go from the work to commutes daily on the autobahns, which has no speed limits. So imagine I have to drive one way 50 kilometers a day on very fast speed, 200 kilometers, or something like this. It's small electric vehicles works in that use cases, or?
Well, you don't have to do 200 kilometers per hour on the Autobahn. It is fun. I have done it, but you don't have to. So as we know, same with petrol cars. When you go fast, it massively increases air resistance, which makes your fuel economy or your efficiency sharply decrease. If you're someone that's doing a lot of motorway driving, then that's an example of someone who potentially doesn't need a smaller car. They're going to need something a bit bigger, a bit more stable, longer wheelbase. I would still discourage an SUV because the bigger, taller shape massively increases that problem. So you get more wind resistance and the efficiency is even worse. That's why Ioniq 6, which I know is a popular car here, is super, super streamlined. And when you go faster in it, the fuel economy is still really, really good. Again, it's about choosing the car that's right for you. If you do a lot of high-speed driving, maybe you do need something that's a bit more motorway appropriate. But the other thing is, I think it's as much about getting the charging infrastructure that we need as it is about putting massive range into the car. Any of those cars that we just showed on screen earlier could do a 50-kilometer Autobahn blast. And maybe if you could plug them in at work at the other end, you'd be fine.
Okay. Let's talk about the regulation. You a bit mentioned about it, and should we still think about if we would like to promote this kind of segment car, which is, seems reasonable, should we, I don't know, regulate that part that we will promote small electric vehicles, then tax large SUVs higher?
I think so. I think, the presentation we saw just before the break highlights the fact that in the case of businesses, they're not just going to go electric because of the planet. It has to make sense to their wallets. And I think the same is true of private individuals. You have to be a hardcore climate change activist to go electric if it's going to cost you lots of money. So we need to make it make sense to people's wallets. 2 years ago, I went to Norway and we made a documentary about their amazing electric vehicle uptake. It's called How Norway Killed the Petrol Car. And we wanted to know, is it because Norwegians care about the environment more of us? Is it because in Norwegian society they care about each other more? No. None of those things. It's just that the government made it make sense to buy electric cars. People were like, okay, we'll get an electric car. And then they realized they really liked them. And as all of us in this room who drive electric will know, people don't really go back. When you go electric, you're like, oh yeah, better. It's just getting people into them that's the difficult part. And that's why I think financial incentives are going to be so important to doing that.
Okay. If we will ask, I don't know, standard people who drive standard car, not an EV, why you don't buy the electric vehicle, one of the, let's say, afraids is rage and anxiety that EVs, I cannot go too fast. And then we will ask, how often you driving more than 300 kilometers a year? They said maybe twice a year or something like this. Same like you mentioned about your iPhone, yeah, about iPhone screen. How do you think, do we have electric vehicles who can cover not 99% how you mentioned on your presentation your needs, but maybe even more than 100? For instance, we have sufficient range, very fast charging, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, over time, batteries are just going to get smaller, lighter, cheaper, and more power dense. And soon you'll be able to get tiny little city hatchbacks that have 300, 400 miles of range. I'm sure of it. But I would stress that I think this 99% rule applies to everyone. I think if you are someone that does long drives on a regular basis, then that's a legitimate requirement. You need that longer range. Absolutely, there are cars out there that can do it. We've got lots of real world 300 plus mile electric cars now. And it's not just really big, expensive ones. The Kia EV3 that we reviewed recently is probably the cheapest way to get a car that can really do 300 miles of range now. So it's happening very quickly.
Okay. I have as well a friend of mine who lives in Belgium, and he has a property in Spain. And every summer he goes to go to Spain, and he drives like a petrol car. And over the discussion, he says that electric vehicle doesn't work. How do you feel? Is this electric vehicles, even smaller ones, are ready for this kind of journeys?
Well, I would argue that potentially falls into the 1% category. If he's just driving around town the rest of the time and he does this one big drive a year, it seems strange to me that you'd have a car with 100 kilowatt hours of battery that you use all of once a year. Of course, it's his right. You know, we never want to push people into electric cars. We don't want people to get in them when it's not ready for them and it doesn't suit them and their needs. That's not a good thing. I would argue, I don't know what the charging infrastructure is like on that route. It's probably a lot less difficult than he thinks, and he probably stops anyway to, you know, go to the toilet and have coffee. But yeah, I think that's an example of what I mean. If you're someone who drives a very long way once a year, it seems strange to me that one drive would inform the decision of the car that you do a very different thing in every other day.
Okay. Last question about the big one, SUVs. Why do you think so? People are like want to jump into the SUVs. You mentioned about the safety, other reason, but this is like that if the trends continue, it means that I don't know, on 2035 will be 90% of SUVs. Maybe we can shape our, let's say, vehicles to the SUV form, like we have Nissan Juke or Volkswagen T-Roc, and we call it maybe as well SUVs, and people like kind of shape vehicles. So why people are obsessed with the SUVs? The main reason?
It's a good question. It's worth noting, of course, that in electric cars, you have the battery in the floor, so it's increasingly common to sit a little bit higher. So actually, a lot of the new small EVs, they kind of look like small SUVs. But again, the problem is that people are going for larger size of vehicle than they need a lot of the time. I completely forgot the question. I just started talking and then I was talking about what happens sometimes.
One day all the market will be only SUVs, you know?
Yeah, well, sorry, why do people need big? Yeah. I think one way out of it, we don't want to end, you're right, if this trend continues, we're going to end up like America, where everyone is scared not to have a big car because everyone else has a big car, which is a terrible situation to be in, again, in a climate crisis. I think one thing that's going to really help, one thing that would really help, is manufacturers being more imaginative with the design of their vehicles, like showing us a better way. And there are cars out there that do that. So I mentioned the Ioniq 5 earlier. It's a super streamlined shape. It shows you the efficiency that you're driving all the time in the screen, and it makes it a game. It makes you want to drive more efficiently. That's really cool. We've seen cars that use so much space in a very small package, like the new Hyundai Insta. Tiny car, massive inside. Even bigger ones like the VW ID Buzz. Sure, it's a big car, but it's so big inside that it's replacing even bigger vans. So I just want to see car brands being a bit more imaginative. Don't just give us the same shape and type of car as we were using in the petrol days. Like, you have a blank piece of paper now. Use that opportunity.
Okay. Okay, let's talk about electric vehicles in general. So how do you think, what is the biggest barrier at the moment? Why EV not transforming so fast?
I think probably a combination of the reasons we've discussed. People are afraid of the range still. There's the price thing. Charging infrastructure, depending on where you are in Europe, may be hit or miss. I think you're quite lucky here in the Baltics, given the great work that that these guys have been doing installing the charging network. And of course, an ongoing problem is that not everyone has a driveway at home and therefore doesn't have the ability to charge their car at home. I think a really important part of making electric vehicles make sense to people who don't have their own driveway is having not just a network of very fast chargers, but a network of slow chargers in residential areas. So I'm very lucky where I live in London. I don't have a driveway, but on my street, there's a 7 kilowatt slow charger. So I just plug it in, go to bed, like people do when they have their own driveway. I don't have to think about charging. Again, we don't want this to be inconvenient. Like, you don't want to be sat in your car waiting when it's charging unless you are doing a big trip. And I think that's going to be really important to achieving that, having that second network of slower chargers as well. And then the other thing is, you know, a previous presentation, someone was asked to what extent are, you know, oil lobbyists affecting this. I think a lot, personally. In the UK, I can't speak to Lithuania, but like the media campaigns against electric vehicles are astonishing. You see these stories in big reputable newspapers and you're like, that's just not true. Reports of electric vehicle fires, which are disproportionately less common than petrol car fires, by the way. Ridiculous. It's made up. Car parks are collapsing because electric vehicles are too heavy, one article said recently. Like, what? What are you talking about? The biggest, most heaviest cars are petrol Range Rovers and plug-in hybrids. So that's another thing. And that's why it's so important that those of us who know about this stuff and are passionate about it are very vocal and are patient with people who aren't educated about it and do some educating wherever we get the opportunity to.
Okay. How do you think when we will reach the moment then electric vehicles itself will be cheaper than internal combustion, drives not the faster but further, and charge as well, at least the same like we now have to refill normal cars?
In terms of price parity, it's already happening. So there are certain brands, I know that Vauxhall or Opel, they have models available as petrol or electric for the same price. That's just the sticker price. That's before we talk about how much cheaper they are to run, as we know. So the gap between the two has come down massively over recent years as the cost of batteries has reduced. I think some brands just don't want to equal those prices. So I'll talk about BMW. There's lots of others, but I'll just mention them as one example because most electric BMW models, you can have same car, electric or petrol. And the electric car is the petrol car with the engine taken out. So it's not even like a proper electric car. And they just put an extra zero on the price. And I really suspect it's because they make a lot more money off the petrol car. So I guess another kind of weirdly good thing about the incoming wave of Chinese vehicles, which will be a lot more affordable, is that we can't get away with that sort of thing anymore. So I think from a technological standpoint, from a cost of battery standpoint, we're in the next year or two, we're going to see a lot of electric vehicles costing the same as their petrol counterparts. And as we know, much cheaper once you've bought them.
Okay, so you would like to say that European manufacturers make this gap for the reason because they would like to promote more gas cars because of that, or?
I mean, I don't want to get sued, but kind of, yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying. And in the same way that, you know, brands who we rely on for small, affordable cars, their first electric cars were big, expensive cars. You look at the first electric Ford model, the Mach-E. Those are not the Fords that I'm used to seeing. The first electric Honda was the Honda E. Yes, it was small, but it was unbelievably expensive. And it had lots of screens and lots of gadgets and tech. And the more of that stuff they put in the car, the more the profit margin increases. So yeah, I sympathize with these car brands. It's a difficult thing. Starting to build electric cars, it's not just about getting your hands on some batteries. You have to rebuild your factories. You have to tear out all the robots and put new ones in. You have to retrain your staff. There's a huge cost involved for these brands to transition to electric. And some of them don't want to. I understand.
Okay. We have here in Europe, European dilemma. You mentioned about the Chinese cars, but again, the lady from the energy agency mentioned that Tesla is #1 in Lithuania. So if we have a choice between Tesla and Chinese brands, what should be right choice? How do you think?
Okay. Let's do Tesla first. So Tesla, the impact that Tesla has had in accelerating the electric vehicle transition cannot be understated. We would be a decade behind where we are today if it wasn't for Tesla. However, a lot of people in Europe don't want to drive Teslas anymore for a very specific reason, which I can relate to personally. My boss, Robert Llewellyn, has owned Teslas for close to 10 years, and he's going to sell his car this year. He's just like, I don't want to be seen with that badge. That's depressing, I think. And look, that guy in charge, he could go tomorrow and it would be fine again, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if he's going to. But what I will say is I think that the Lithuanian market relies heavily on used electric cars. And when you look at those lists of most popular models, those are kind of the best electric cars from a few years ago. I think if you look at the best new EVs today, I would not say that Tesla are way out in front like they used to be. They're still very good at making electric vehicle platforms, making cars that go a long way on their batteries, very efficient. But I think that Tesla have been relying more on kind of gimmicks in the last few years. The touch screen to select your drive, the touch indicator buttons, a fucking Cybertruck. What the hell's that thing? It's not all about Tesla anymore. I think the gap has really closed between them and their competitors. And then as far as Chinese stuff, I know that buyers had uncertainty when Chinese cars first arrived. When we started doing Chinese cars on the channel a few years ago, we got a lot of comments being like, I can't believe you're talking about Chinese manufacturers. I can't believe you're supporting the Chinese government. It's a complicated issue, but what I would say to people is that comment that they wrote it on their iPhone or their computer, which was made in China. And here's the other thing, regardless of where your electric car is from, its battery is from China. And even if it's not, the materials in your battery were refined in China. That is a process that they have total monopoly of. So the fact is, because they had the foresight to jump on electric vehicles years before the rest of the world, China is a massive player in electric vehicles and will be for a very, very, very long time. There is simply no getting away from it.
Okay. Let's talk about the technologies, and in electric vehicles. How do you think, which brand new technologies we will see in the next 5 years, which doesn't talk today?
A cool thing about our job is we get to go and see companies working on some really experimental technologies, and it's always, you never know which one is going to make it. Solid state batteries is something that people have been talking about being 1 year away for a long time now, but it seems like we are really close. So that's a new battery technology that's, all those things we want: smaller, denser, lighter, more affordable. That's exciting. And we've looked at battery swapping technologies. If you go to Norway, they have battery swap stations where your car goes up on a lift. Robots take the battery out, puts a new one in, it takes 5 minutes, and you've got 300 miles more range. Interesting, but there's problems. It only works for that brand of cars. It's NIO that are doing it, and all the brands would have to agree to use the same screws in the same places. It would have to be completely standardized. I don't see that happening. People talk about wireless charging a lot. Are we going to have motorways with wireless chargers underneath them? That would be cool. I don't think so. I think there's specific uses for these things. I think battery swapping is great for long distance vehicles, big trucks. I think wireless charging is potentially very useful for example, people with physical disabilities, people who use wheelchairs, very difficult to operate charge cables. In Oslo, they have buses that are using wireless chargers. So the buses normally need giant batteries, but in Oslo, they've got big buses with small batteries, and at every bus stop is a wireless charging pad. So every time the bus stops, just like little extra 1%, all it needs to get to the next bus stop. So there's lots of cool things happening that are taking care of some of the more specific problems we have. We still need to figure out big vehicles, planes, and that's where stuff like hydrogen might come in handy. But I really do think that as far as passenger cars, this is the right answer. That we have the technology we need, and it's just a case of making it smaller, lighter, more affordable, and having chargers everywhere.
Okay, you mentioned on solid-state batteries, which is an interesting part. How do you think how it affects small electric vehicle design?
I'm bad at battery chemistry. I was so bad at chemistry in school, and now I have to talk about it all the time on a stage. I have colleagues who are much better equipped at talking about this, but the gist of it is it's a lot more power dense. It's a lot smaller. And I think it's BYD that claim to have started putting it in some of their in their passenger car. Unsurprisingly, it's the Chinese brands that are the first ones to have the breakthroughs, which again is another thing when you look at Chinese electric vehicles. As I mentioned, like the glove box might not be as fancy, but the technology underneath is so groundbreaking. Actually, to circle back to your last question about new technologies, when you look at BYD cars, what's a really cool thing about them is the battery is a structural element. They call it cell to chassis or something. So you don't put the battery in the battery is the car. And that means it's lighter, stiffer, you can get more batteries into it. So like that's not super sexy, right? It's not like solid state or battery swapping, but those little innovations are going to make such a difference.
How do you think with the solid-state battery and, for instance, car like a Renault 5, can we expect someday to have a 1,000-mile range?
It's a long way to go without stopping to go to the toilet. I don't know. I really don't think we need that much more range than some. You know, the biggest range EVs that you can buy now will do 350 miles in the right conditions. I just don't see that we need an awful lot more than that unless you live somewhere with terrible chargers. If you need more range than that, the charging infrastructure is not good enough where you live, I feel. What will be great is when we can get big range like that into smaller cars, because at the moment, if you need big range, you do have to get a slightly bigger car. And that shouldn't be the case. So I hope that things like solid state are going to help us with that. Yeah, having smaller vehicles that have got maybe a sensible range option and then a really big battery option for people that might need it.
Okay, but as you heard from previous presenters that we have to cut at least twice or even more the real range, and actually that's why we need bigger energy densities in the batteries to apply on more use cases. You don't think so?
One of the things that makes me the most angry is brands giving these insane, dishonest numbers about the range that their cars offer. It's so unhelpful to this whole process because people buy that car based on that number and then they get in it and they realize you have to chop in half, and then they go, oh, electric cars are terrible. It's not helpful. There are certain brands, Kia, Hyundai, Renault actually are really good for this. The range they say is the range that you'll get. If you look at an electric Ford, they'll say something like up to 600 kilometers. It's like, yeah, if I'm going downhill in the summer, it's ridiculous. It's not. So brands need to get better at that. You know, we don't want normal people to have to do maths. Like, I know the same thing that you do. I take the kilowatt hour of the battery and I look at the efficiency and I know what the real range is. But that's boring. People shouldn't have to do that. So brands need to get better at being honest with those numbers. There's a website called EV Database that I would really recommend if you're not familiar with it, where they have an amazing algorithm and they generate real world range figures for all the cars that are on sale in Europe. And they do highway, city, highway winter, city winter combined, everything you need. So yeah, we need more resources like that. We need brands to stop being dishonest about what their cars are capable of, because it's really not helping. Okay.
Actually, same happening with the charging as well. They indicate that this car can charge 250 kilowatts, but in reality it's a bit different. So yeah, it's not about only range, but about different parts as well. All right, but let's talk about the charging. How do you think our charging point operators are still lagging behind, or they are actually even in front of the market?
I think in terms of the availability of rapid chargers here in the Baltics, I think Ignitis have done an amazing job in getting ahead of demand. You know, charging companies typically don't want to be ahead of electric vehicle demand because they want their chargers to be busy. They want people to be using them so that they make money from them. I feel these guys have done a really good job of actually getting out ahead of it. They're ready for electric vehicle ownership to increase in the Baltic. So that's a really, really good thing. I feel that things like plug and charge are really, really helpful. You know, you just don't want to be messing around with anything when you get to a charger. You just want to plug it in and you get a nice bill at the end of the month. It just comes straight out of your account. We're very close to achieving that. And the other thing I would mention that I said before again is that network of slow chargers in residential areas for people who don't have their own driveway, who live in apartment buildings maybe, is a really, really, really important thing because you don't want all your charging to be done at a rapid charger while you're sat there waiting. You want to be busy doing other things when your car is charging, like sleeping or you're at work or at the supermarket. That's another thing, destination charging we talk about a lot. I think, again, you guys are pretty good for that here. But like, really, there should just be chargers everywhere that you go in a car. It shouldn't be something that you think about, oh, I have to charge my car this evening, get it to 100%. It should just be like, anywhere you park, just plug it in, extra 5%. And if that was the model, if we had them supermarket car parks on the street near where we live, you wouldn't be worried about filling up to 100%. You wouldn't be worried about having 300 miles of range because you just get a little bit of a charge everywhere you go. Okay.
Let's talk about the HPC segment, which stands for rapid charging. How do you think current charging power is enough, or we have to increase?
Yeah, so in terms of big lorries that do, transcontinental journeys, like they need fast chargers. They don't want to stop, right? They can't afford to stop. Anytime that they're paused on the side of the road, they're losing money. So there's a few exciting things happening there. We're seeing like megawatt chargers, which is like terrifying to think about. They make this like whirring noise. You can like hear the electricity like shooting into the... Scary. But that's great. And then maybe, as I mentioned, maybe that's where you see things like maybe hydrogen, but certainly battery swapping coming into play. We visited a company in Australia, which is obviously like the biggest, most sparse country. And they have these thing called road trains there. It's a lorry and it'll be pulling like 50 meters of trailer behind it. It's an incredible sight. And they drive through the outback, thousands and thousands of miles, just nothing. They're doing battery swapping on those trucks. So they've got these little swapping stations. It's not very elegant. There's no like fancy robots. It's a forklift truck and a guy with a cigarette. He's just like cranes these giant cells out of these batteries and puts new ones in. So yeah, the bigger stuff, the more energy intense stuff is a real engineering challenge. I think some combination of really fast chargers and then maybe a little bit of battery swapping, maybe a little bit of hydrogen for extreme use cases should just about cover it off.
Okay. Let's talk about the future, about the cities. How do you think how the cities looks like after the 20 years?
Wow. I like small cars. I've mentioned this. If I had more time, I would have started talking about micro cars in that presentation, which I know you guys have here. It's not really a thing in the UK. They're very popular in like France and Italy. Like in France, every street corner, there's a Citroen Ami that you can rent for like a few cents a minute, just like the Bolt scooters, right? Except it's a little car. I don't understand what business big cars have in city centres, full stop. In Europe, our countries are old. Our cities are made for horses, and now we've got 5-metre-long SUVs. It makes no sense to me. If it was up to me, I would basically ban big cars from city centres and just have a rentable network of these small micro cars. I'm kind of specifically talking about London here. In London we have a very high congestion charge. We have something called the ULEZ, ultra low emission zone. So like older cars that are more pollutive, you pay like £20 a day to come into the centre of London. Wow. And people hate that because there isn't a solution. We're not offering them something better. I think something like that, I think more car sharing schemes for like small, light vehicles would be such an amazing way of making our city centres friendlier to pedestrians, friendlier to cyclists. And that's the thing that I really, really want to see. As we go through this energy transition, I want us to give our city centres back to pedestrians.
So basically, you imagine that our future cities will, especially city centres, will be without the cars, only for the.
It would be nice, wouldn't it? Again, you kind of go to Oslo. It's so annoying. They're so annoying over there because they know that they've done it the best as well. You go into the centre of Oslo, it's just like trees and bicycles, and you're like, yeah, you win. That's exactly what it's supposed to be like in a city centre. What they've done there is basically, it's quite a simple solution. They basically just removed all the parking spaces in the middle of Oslo. Like, well, if you can't park, you can't come. Simple. And it kind of works. It's just very, very quiet. There's a lot of cyclists, you know. Yeah, we're so used to just having big, heavy cars flying past us wherever we are in our cities, wherever we're walking. And when you go to somewhere that's heavily pedestrianized, you realize just how much nicer it is. And yeah, so I want more of that.
All right. By the way, we've been with the team in Oslo recently, and you know, most let's say noisy thing in city center of Oslo have been seagulls, like birds. You know, really nice experience. Okay, what about the fuel itself? Will the batteries dominate, or we will see the hydrogen, e-fuels, maybe gas, diesel as well remains? How do you think?
Excuse me. I think in terms of passenger cars, I think battery electric is the answer. I think we're so far ahead with that technology now, it would seem strange to me to start like massively investing in something else. So for privately owned passenger cars, I think battery electric is the best solution. There are use cases. So again, we talked about hydrogen with regard to big stuff, maybe aeroplanes, trucks, maybe. E-fuels, well, I think the thing that gets me excited about e-fuels is I like old cars. I like petrol cars. You know, they're bad for the planet, but they're fun to drive. So the idea that maybe people who are lucky enough to have an old Porsche in their garage that they drive, you know, on a nice, beautiful summer's day, could continue to enjoy that car in a sustainable way thanks to e-fuels. That's a really exciting thing, but it's very energy intensive to make. It's very expensive to make. I don't personally imagine that that's going to suddenly overtake. I'd be happy to be wrong, but I don't think that I think that's going to be a kind of a enthusiast thing.
So basically you want to say that battery technology has no competition in the future, or?
I'm sure there'll be lots of clever little solutions to specific problems, but for the problem of the cars that we normal people own and drive, I think the battery electric is here to stay.
Okay. Actually, you know, we getting, like you mentioned, like lobby organization from especially oil segment that lobby against that says that electric vehicle doesn't work, it never works well, etc., etc. But we see the countries like Norway now, Denmark is following impressive numbers, and we see that it really works. It's like as simple as, I don't know, Sunday brunch, and this is even, you know, grandparents and grandmothers driving EV without any questions, you know, it's like new normal, you know. How do you think when the situation will happen, not only in these Nordic countries, but in our continent, maybe in other regions as well?
When will we see mass EV adoption, you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think we have, you know, we almost have all the pieces in play. I think the technology is getting close to where we need it to be. We need batteries to get a bit smaller and a bit cheaper. They're really big and heavy still. We were talking about this yesterday. I think we'll look at this period in time in terms of battery technology as like mobile phones in the 1990s. You know, when your mobile phone had like wheels and you had to pull it along behind you, like that's kind of what batteries like now. They're massive. So that needs to happen. That's going to make smaller cars easier to build, cheaper, and it's charging infrastructure as well. We just need to make it so that it's not something that you have to think about. We don't want people to be having to do calculations in their head before a long drive to figure out, I have to stop here, I have to stop here, and you know, it's boring. We didn't have to do that with petrol cars. We don't want to have to start doing it with electric cars. And yeah, it's just about making it simple for people. So I think the affordability point, we're getting pretty close. And then it's all about charging infrastructure. It's about making it so that everyone has an opportunity to charge wherever they go and don't really have to think about it or worry about it.
All right. All right. We have as well some questions from our audience. So our audience, if you have, would like to ask something, feel free to do that. So we have a question from the Benas. Have you seen some hardcore petrol heads switch sides? What was the story behind that?
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that the one group of people that electric still doesn't really work for is people who like love driving, love manual gearboxes and the sound of a V8 engine. Like, I love that stuff. I really, really do. And you don't get that connection to a car in an electric car. That goes without saying that 90% of people don't care about connection to their car, right? Like my mum doesn't care about the exhaust sound. She just wants to get from A to B cheaply. But for people like me who love to drive, the options are still very limited. The first time I drove a Porsche Taycan, that got me very hopeful. There's no engine, there's no sound, but it just feels amazing to drive. And of course, it's more than just the engine that makes a fun car fun. It's the steering feel, it's the suspension, it's the chassis, it's the weight. But the most exciting one, there was a photo of it early on in my presentation, is the Ioniq 5N. So this is the performance version of a big family car. And what they've done with that thing is unbelievable. So it's very fast, it's got big tires and big suspension and brakes, but you push a button on the steering wheel and then a fake engine bursts into life. And then you press another button on the steering wheel and now you have a fake gearbox. You have paddle shift gears. It sounds silly, but it is absolutely, it's unbelievable. So if you kind of accelerate, you get to the top of the gear and it won't give you any more power and you have to pull the upshift. And then when you pull the upshift, it briefly disconnects the motor. So you kind of jerk back in your seat. You have engine braking. If you downshift, it is freaky. And after about 20 minutes, you just forget. You just forget. And here's the best thing. And when you don't feel like having all of that, you just turn it off and you have an electric car. Absolutely astonishing. We have, let's remember, car brands have been like making fake noise in petrol cars for the last few years because it's hard to make new petrol cars sound good with all the emissions regulations. So that was the one that I drove that got me the most excited, that we're going to have really, really, really fun cars in the future. And that's a two-ton SUV. In the next year, we're going to see an electric Porsche Boxster, an electric Lotus sports car, and an electric Alpine sports car. And they're all doing very interesting, different things to try and make them feel fun and special. So the Porsche, for example, instead of having the battery pack in the floor, you have a big block of batteries right behind you. So it's like a mid-engine car. You have that weight distribution. Sorry, this is really boring if you're not into driving cars. But yeah, I'm optimistic that clever engineers will find a way, and that for people like me who love to drive, there will always be cars that serve us.
Okay. And next question from the audience. One of the future use cases for going EV is the overall integration with the energy markets and the grid. Wouldn't you say that in that sense it will be much more convenient if we possess larger battery vehicles in big numbers? Think about the vehicle to grid use cases.
Yeah, vehicle to grid is it's just right at the top of my intelligence level, but I think I've had people explain to me why it's so exciting. This idea of everyone having a big battery on their driveway, maybe plugged into their car overnight if they have their own driveway, and energy being able to go in both directions. So that means being able to, if you want to, sell energy back to the grid at peak times and make money from it, and then charge your car off peak times for really, really cheap. That's quite a nice idea, isn't it? In terms of grid stabilization and demand as well, we're going to need a lot of power in the electric future. But if everyone has a car plugged in that has sort of two-way power delivery, it makes that a lot more straightforward in terms of kind of putting the power where we need it. I mean, I don't think that's a reason to have a 100 kilowatt hour battery, just that. But we've seen some amazing things happen. I know in the US recently, when there were floods, Ford deployed a fleet of Ford F-150 Lightnings, and they're using these things to power people's houses, to power campsites. So yeah, vehicle to load, extremely exciting technology. I don't think that that we all therefore have to have big, big batteries.
Okay. Next question for the audience. What do you think about Chinese electric vehicle safety for the drivers and passengers, and also security threat, like Chinese government could take control of our Chinese electric vehicles? In terms, I mean, it's about geopolitics.
Yeah. So in terms of safety, the same, if not better. They have the same crash safety, but the batteries are more advanced. So electric vehicle battery fires are not as big of a thing as certain media outlets would have you believe. But if something in a freak accident, if something happens to a battery and it catches fire, it's bad. BYD's battery that they put in their cars is called the Blade battery. And one of the tests that they do is they stab it with a big nail and it doesn't even catch fire when you do that, which is a freaky piece of engineering. So in terms of safety, I would say they're probably slightly ahead. In terms of security, I don't know. I don't know. Are they watching us through the cameras in our cars? I really hope not. It's not a serious answer, but I always say when people are like, "Oh, aren't you worried that the government?" and what, it's like, my life is boring. I'm not doing anything that they're going to be like, okay, we can invade with this information. I'm making light of a serious issue. I think we're going to have to make sure that we're very, very that we're very, very careful in making sure that there's no kind of weird, nefarious kind of technology built into the cars. But I think we'd find out about it very quickly if that was. If you think about the sort of Dieselgate scandal a few years back, you know, people tear these cars apart and they find these things if there's like a weird special camera hidden in the steering wheel filming your life.
So basically, there's no chance that Chinese just switch off your vehicle and that's all.
It's not happened to date. I certainly hope not. Wow.
Okay. All right. The second question is...
Don't film that. Don't film me saying that and then post it on the news in 10 years' time when all the cars get turned off, please.
All right. All right. People are still afraid of used electric vehicles in Lithuania. Lithuania is the second-hand market. How do you prove that used EVs are good, or maybe they are bad? How choose used EV properly?
I'm really glad you asked about this. So first of all, I can't understand why anyone buys a new car. I love that Lithuania is a primarily used car market because, like, why would you spend that extra money? Cars lose like a quarter of their value in the first 2 years. Insane to me that anyone buys a new car. However, an anxiety that people have with regards to used electric cars is the battery health, right? Because batteries degrade over time. The more that you charge them and discharge them, they get little crystals inside the battery, and that means that the maximum battery capacity is reduced. Now, in something like an early Nissan Leaf that came out in 2011, if you drive one of those for 100,000 miles, the total range is now going to be like 20 miles. Like, it's going to be really, really bad. As of about 2013 onwards, from the BMW i3 onwards, we started having thermal management systems in batteries. So it's really all about looking after the temperature of the batteries. Batteries are like us. They actually like the same temperature that the human body likes. They don't want to be too hot. They don't want to be too cold. And if they are those things, that's where they degrade. And they get hot when they're charged and when they're discharged. So we've gotten a lot better over time at managing battery degradation and making sure that you don't lose quite as much via lots of charge cycles. However, what would be really nice is to know exactly how much has been lost. And this is something that we've achieved in the last year or so. So in the UK, there are companies now that are doing battery state of health certificates. So if you buy a car from a used car dealer, they have a device that they plug into the car and it goes bloop, 98%. So that car still has 98% of its original battery health, which if the car had 300 miles of range, it now has 300 minus 6 miles of range, right? That's what it's lost. I give it less than a year before that is absolutely standardized across Europe, that you can go to any used car dealer and on the window, there'll be a sticker that says this electric car still has 98%, 95% of its original battery capacity. And I think that's going to be a breakthrough, not just in terms of buyer confidence, but hopefully insurance prices, because insurers are still a little bit afraid of electric cars. And this is one of the reasons why. So I think that's a big breakthrough.
All right. And we have a last question from the audience that we have at Ignitis on LT EV database as well. Check it out. So if somebody wants to check, we have as well connection to the EV database directly, and in our local language, you can check this out. All right. So, and finally, I would like to, wish to this audience who listen us carefully to this country and maybe to our region something nice.
Something nice. Oh, be vocal. That's the big one that we always like to say at the end of these. Be the annoying person that doesn't shut up about how great electric cars are. That's our job as the people who know how great that they are, because it is scary. If you're not clued up on the technology, it's intimidating, and you're hearing all these numbers and kilowatt hours, and it's, I understand why people who don't know about electric vehicles and then read something in a newspaper think that they are bad and they won't work for them. It's our job as the people who know the truth to make them come for a ride in our electric car, have a little test drive, answer all the stupid questions that they have, because brands aren't doing a good enough job of this. A car brand, a Mercedes, will sell you a new electric car and then give you the keys and go, bye-bye. And they don't tell you which end of the charge cable goes where. How does this all work? So I think the best thing that we can do as people who are proponents of electric vehicles is be vocal, be supportive, and take as many stupid questions as we can from as many of our friends and family as possible.
Thank you very much, Jack. It was a pleasure to having you here.
Thank you.
And yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you.